Okay, so last time we went through some basic syntax. I've added a few more links here that goes through that in depth, so go ahead and read through those tutorials. For this next little bit, we're going to explore loops, and I'm going to go ahead and start up with some of the notes in this great C++ resource over here. So loops is starting conversations on control structures, which is how you're controlling information flowing through your code. We'll play around with some if-else statements as well. That's another way to kind of make decisions of if true, then this, if false, then that. Here's an example of a while loop. So I'll have you guys create a while loop as part of this. So here would be example code, the output of that code. Here's a do while loop, which is very similar. It's going to start with a do, and then everything in the parentheses, it will keep doing while some condition is true or not true. Okay, here's a for loop, and a for loop is a little bit different in that we have a specific number of times that we are going to be executing the code. So while you can say it's while n is larger than 0. So it's some kind of a condition, and if n never reaches 0, this will go infinitely. It'll just keep going and keep going and keep going. So you have to be very careful with while loops that you don't get in some kind of an infinite loop. So it's probably better to start with a for loop, because these are a bit safer. You don't get, your program stuck in some kind of a thing. So here is your for loop, and the text here is going to talk through what is happening in the parentheses here. So we're going to start with some kind of initialization. So we have a variable n, and we're going to declare that variable as an integer here, and its starting value is going to be 10. Here is our condition for the for loop, so that's kind of similar to a while loop. So we're going to keep going around this while n is larger than 0. And the last little bit, for each time around the loop, we are going to change what that number n is. This little minus minus, that is a C++ operator. That means we're actually going to be decreasing the value of n by 1 each time we go around the loop. Okay, inside this for loop, what we're going to do inside each of these loops is contained within these curly brackets. So in this case, we have one set of curly brackets that has everything going on in the main program, and then we have a second set of curly brackets that is connected with this for loop. So I can have a lot of different lines in here, multiple calculations, but as long as it stays inside of these curly brackets, that's going to be part of what's happening as it cycles through this for loop. Okay, so after it cycles down, so this n is going to count down 10, 9, 8, 7. It gets all the way to 1, and then it says, uh-oh, I'm not, as soon as it passes that 0 threshold, it's going to jump out of this loop, and the very last thing it sends the user will be this liftoff. Okay, what I have assigned to you is a slightly different task than what is given in the notes. So instead of counting down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, I want to see if you can make a loop that adds a series of numbers together. So to show you what that would look like, let me just bring over an Excel file. Sometimes these things are good to kind of think through the algorithm or the flow chart of what's happening in that calculation here. So if I have some column of numbers, maybe I have 10 numbers, and then I want to add together that column of numbers. Now, Excel has a built-in program to do this. That sum function, that's a built-in program. And if you think about kind of what that program is actually doing inside of there, so maybe I'm going to make another column here that would go through all the individual calculations that would get up to this 55, right? So I'm going to start this column. Maybe I'll start it with 1, with our starting number. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this starting number with the next number in here, right? And then I'm going to start where I ended off, and I'll add this next number in. Right, so each time around, I have to do kind of another addition. And if I take that calculation and pull it down, so each time through, I'm kind of adding in that new number to what the previous sum was, right? And then by the time I get to the base, I've reached that same number of adding all of this together. So this is, if you think about all these little calculations that are happening to finally get to the end result of adding everything in that column together, this would be a good example of something that could be done in a loop. Okay, so now that you kind of get the gist of what we are trying to accomplish here, let me go back to the compiler over here. And the best way for anything is to kind of grab what somebody else has done, understand what it's doing, and then modify it for your use. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this into, we'll go ahead and just create a new project here. So I'm going to leave my old one behind, and I'm going to go ahead and say Control V. Get in the habit of saving this. So this will be example for a for loop add. Probably shouldn't give it a title that long, but it's good to give it some kind of a title that when you're skimming through files, you can understand what what those files go with. Okay, so this little example over here, it only had one little comment line. I'm going to go ahead. It's good to kind of keep a reference of where you're getting codes from, so that when you come back in the future, you can say, "Oh yeah." So rather than just one comment line, I'm going to use a bunch of comment lines. So I'm going to go ahead and use this little guy for the comments, and I'll add a few lines in, and then when I'm done, I will end my comment with another little asterisk and backslash. So I'm going to go ahead and change this code to add numbers together. Okay, so some simple little description so that in the future you can come back and say, oh yeah, I started from that tutorial and then I changed it around a little bit. So we're going to start the similar way that we did. So we have the in-out stream because we're using cout, so we'll need to include that. We'll just go ahead and throw that standard namespace in here so we don't have to declare each little name that we use. And before we start changing this, let's go ahead and run it and make sure we understand what's happening. Oh, we forgot to choose our language. C++, please. Thank you. Here we go. So, program has finished. So we have 10, 9, 8, 7, liftoff. And if we want to kind of walk through that line by line, we could put a couple stops in here and do the debugger, and we can see that it's going to be stuck inside of that loop. See, so I'm continuing, and it's stuck in this loop all the way 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And you can watch our variable is counting down. So that's this minus minus is allowing this n to count down. So here we go, 3, 2, 1, and it's going to jump out of the loop here pretty soon. Oh, it finally made it out of the loop. So as soon as n was not larger than 0 anymore, so as soon as it hit 0, then we ended the loop, and now we have our final C out liftoff, and we're done. Okay, so that would be, for their example, how can we change that so that instead of saying 10, 9, 8, we're starting at 1, and then we are counting up. So what do you think? So let's go ahead and maybe instead of starting at 10, we start at 1. Oh, yes, stop, debugger. Now we can edit it. Okay, so we're going to start at 1, and we maybe want to go until 10. How many numbers do you want to add together? Let's go ahead and go till 10. But this time it's going to be, instead of larger than or equal to 10, let's make it less than or equal to 10. And instead of counting down, let's count up. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. This is, yeah, programming, whether you leave the parentheses on the top or bring it down, it's kind of a, a personal preference. Before we go any further with this, let's go ahead and run it and see what's happening here. Okay, so now instead of counting down from 10, we're counting up to 10. So what we've done so far is we now have kind of this column of numbers, but we need to do a little bit more than just get this column of numbers. We want to start doing this calculation to it, and that's going to mean we need maybe one more variable. So we have one variable n that's kind of keeping all of this number over here. Let's make another variable. I'll call it maybe SM for sum. And we'll go ahead and we'll let this variable hold all of this information in there. So when we're using a new variable, that means we need to declare it somehow. This one was declared inside the for loop. Make sure we're inside this main program. So I'll go ahead and say integer, and we'll go ahead and initialize that too. So we'll start that variable with a value of 0, and we'll call that an integer too. So this is, we're not really using decimal places here. Okay, so we have a new integer, and inside this for loop, I'm going to put a new line, and what we can do is, and there's a couple different ways that we can enter this. We can say SM equals SM plus 1. That is one way to put this in. Kind of a fancy way for C++, a little bit of a shortcut, is to put it in like this. Let's see, I think that would be an end. Okay, so end that guy with a semicolon, and maybe we want to now output what that sum is. So let's go ahead and just run this and see what happens. Okay, so 1, 3, 6, 10, 15. Let's compare that to what's happening on our Excel spreadsheet. So here's our Excel spreadsheet. So we're starting out with 1, and then we add 1 plus 2 is 3, and then 3 plus 3 is 6, and then so do you see how we're kind of walking through this thing? So we're getting the same sequence of numbers all the way up at ending at 55, and then maybe at the very end, instead of saying liftoff, we can say Cout. And what do you think? The sum of 1 to 10 is, that little \n that gives a program a new line. So if you want to output multiple lines, that's one way to do it. So maybe we'll say SM. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and try that out. So yay! The sum of 1 to 10 is 55. Woohoo! Okay, so anyways, that's that's a simple for loop.